Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of Red Pill Religion, where among the things we like to say here are religion and politics can never be separated. Please check us out online, where you're most likely listening now, on our YouTube channel at Red Pill Religion. Give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. We're also on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called Red Pill Religion, and we're on Gab AI. We have a page there as well, and on Dissenter, which is Gab's new commenting platform. We are also on Minds.com, and we have a blog at redpillreligion.com, and a storefront there where you can purchase various items with images created by our artists in residence. So you can also support us by purchasing those items from our storefront. And as always, we could use your financial support and donations for all kinds of different expenses associated with the Red Pill Religion Project. You can support us through Patreon, either through one-time donations, or you can become a monthly supporter, which would be very appreciated. And you can also donate through PayPal, which we have linked to our blog, and through Bitcoin. And I am kind of new here as far as a voice on Red Pill Religion, so you probably don't recognize my voice. And my name is Aaron. I have a YouTube channel called Isle of Aaron, that's spelled Arran. And just to give you a brief background about who I am, I was born into a religious or a reformist Jewish family. And I ended up later in my kind of late teens being saved by Christ, and I never fully observed Christianity, though. I was just kind of one of those people who identified as a Christian, but I didn't fully observe. And then later, I lived in the Pacific Northwest, and I attended Portland State University. And when I was attending Portland State University, I became involved with a student group there that was centered around Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, or BDS. And for any of you out there who don't know what BDS is, I'll just read directly from the website. It's bdsmovement.net. And it says on the overview that the BDS movement is building an economic boycott of Israel and developing effective campaigns against companies that participate in Israel's oppression of Palestinians. International companies aid and abet Israel's violations of international law, including by operating in illegal Israeli settlements and acting as contractors for the Israeli military and government. Campaigning has led to major companies such as Veolia and Orange selling up and leaving Israel altogether, and a range of investors divesting from Israel and international companies. The UN, the World Bank, and other experts say that BDS is having an important economic impact on Israel, and that this could well grow as the movement develops. And then in the intro, which has the headline of Economic and Corporate Support for Israeli Apartheid, reads, "The economic boycott of Israel aims to put pressure on Israel to comply with international law and to persuade private companies to end their participation in Israel's crimes. The Israeli economy is especially dependent on international trade and investment, making it especially susceptible to international economic boycotts. Many international companies such as G4S and HP profit from helping Israel to maintain its system of apartheid and settler colonialism. Campaigns against and divestment from international companies increases the pressure on them to end their complicity with Israel's oppression of Palestinians." So it's basically a response to the perceived oppression of the Israeli state and apartheid of the Israeli state of Palestinian Arabs, and there's also a lot of other issues that play into it, such as the Palestinian right to return. And I became involved with the student group basically because I am Jewish by birth, and I figured that if there's if the state of Israel, which is it defines itself as a Jewish state. If it was going to be, if it was carrying out these alleged crimes, and it's a Jewish state, then I kind of had an issue with that happening on my behalf as a Jew. And then I kind of started to wonder if the principles of BDS actually aligned with the principles of a free market, and I sort of I wasn't sure on that. I kind of just distanced myself from it more because I wasn't sure about all that. Years later, after I became involved with the Red Pill Religion Project, I came across the work of Imad-ad-Dean Ahmad, and he is the co-founder of the Minaret of Freedom Institute, who I did a pre-recorded interview with, and that's what you'll be listening to tonight. Then I came across his work. Initially, what piqued my interest is a video of his online that's titled Intelligent Design Muslim Perspective, where if I remember correctly, he is discussing the evidence for intelligent design through physics, and as far as our discussion tonight, it has really nothing to do with that. But we ended up kind of agreeing to do this interview due to my interest in how he does think that BDS aligns with principles of a free market, which are principles that many Americans hold dear, who also are big supporters of our constitutional rights and our constitutional rights to free speech. And this is also happening, this interview that is happening in the wake of many states, I think up to 29 now, are pushing for legislation that would basically criminalize any potential talk of BDS or support of BDS. So that's a very important issue as well concerning free speech. So with that, here is our interview. So Dr. Ahmed, what is the Minaret of Freedom Institute?
The Minaret of Freedom Institute is a Muslim libertarian think tank that was founded in 1993 for the purpose of countering distortions about Islam, showing the origin of certain modern values that came out of Islamic civilization, educating Muslims and non-Muslims on the importance of liberty and free markets, and trying to advance the status of Muslims, whether they live in the oppressive East or the hostile West. We do that through academic papers, through interviews, through educational programs. Our blog has become very, very important method of communicating, and through collaboration with other organizations, through interfaith exercises, or through educational programs of various kinds.
So you work with people from various religious backgrounds then?
Yes, with Christians and with Jews. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I actually participated in a program at American University on Hindu-Muslim relations. So,
that's interesting. So, one of the reasons I initially was interested in having a conversation with you had to do with your stance on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement and the BDS. And for people out there listening who are unfamiliar with BDS, it has to do with addressing the I'm reading this off the website. It's bdsmovement.net, and it says it's an economic boycott of Israel that aims to put pressure on Israel to comply with international law and to persuade private companies to end their participation in Israel's crimes. The Israel economy is especially dependent on international trade and investment, making it especially susceptible to international economic boycotts. Many international companies such as G4S and HP profit from helping Israel to maintain its system of apartheid and settler colonialism. Campaigns against and divestment from international companies increases the pressure on them to end their complicity with Israel's oppression of Palestinians. So it was set up to address, oppression by, what many people believe to be oppression by the Israeli state, and support for Israeli apartheid, or to end support for Israeli apartheid. And the apartheid, many people believe, is taking place, is widely compared to the apartheid that was going on during the apartheid era South Africa. And there are also many people who deny that apartheid exists in Israel. Many pro-Zionists and many very ardent supporters of the Israeli state and Israel's right to exist as a homeland for Jewish people. And it was back in 2010 when I attended Portland State University, and I was involved to some extent with the BDS student group there, just because I wanted to know why it was people were concerned and people believed that apartheid exists in Israel, and why Israel was considered to be by many people a terrorist state, and why they believed that it was oppressing Palestinians. And I started to wonder, whether or not BDS aligned with or whether boycotting, should I say, in general, aligned with the principles of a free market. And you believe it does.
Right.
So how is it that you see BDS aligns with free market principles?
Well, I think the issue is quite essential. If you believe in a free market, then you believe in the right of individuals who participate in the market to engage or to refrain from engaging in any particular trade or transaction or set of trades or transactions within that market. Therefore, if I have the right to purchase some product from some seller, I must have the right to refuse to purchase that product from that seller, or to refuse to purchase the product at all, or refuse to deal with the seller at all, and vice versa. If a free market doesn't mean that, then it doesn't mean anything.
That's fair enough. That makes sense to me. Especially if the products that you're boycotting, if they are seen as unethical and harmful and so on and so forth. To my knowledge, one of the main reasons why people who oppose BDS do oppose it is that the people who started the BDS movement were connected with Hamas and the Hamas Charter, and the idea that it calls for the all-out destruction of the Israeli state and of the Jewish homeland, and I guess to me that's also pretty understandable because of the whole idea of never again.
Why is it any harder to separate BDS from Hamas than to separate the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa from the ANC? The ANC was accused of being a communist organization, and while that may have been an exaggeration, it's sort of, I think it's beside the point. If someone is opposed to apartheid, they should have the right to boycott uh, without having to, justify the origins, if indeed that were the origins of the movement, which I understand is disputed, to dispute the origins of the movement. Furthermore, I very, very, one of the things that needs to be talked about very much is this attempt to conflate Israel with Judaism. They're not the same thing. Quite apart from the fact that, as I said, Orthodox Jews at one point were opposed to the establishment of the State of Israel, and some of them still are, there is the fact that it's the one thing that perhaps was, the objectionable parts of the Hamas charter were the ones that were anti-Jewish as opposed to anti-Israel, and that made some confusion between those two concepts. But the fact is, the defenders of Israel in the United States do the same thing. They want to conflate the two, and they want to say that, if you are critical of Israel, then you are anti-Semitic. But even someone who wants to just doesn't believe in that the Israeli state is justified need not be anti-Semitic. After all, there was and unfortunately I'm having a mental block at the moment. I can't remember his name, but there's a famous, very extreme right-wing Zionist, a founder of a terrorist group in Israel, who once made the following question as a challenge to liberal Zionists. He said, "How can you have?" He said, "Just explain to me. How can you have a state that is democratic, Jewish, and mostly non-Jews?" That's the question. And that's why then, so when someone says, as I do, I believe in the right of return. I believe that every Palestinian should have the right to decide whether or not he wants to go back to his homeland. Zionists will say, well, that's calling for the destruction of the state of Israel, because even though you don't put it in those words, when all the Palestinians who want to come back, they're going to be a majority. And then either Israel can no longer be a democracy or can no longer be a Jewish state.
Yes, that is actually something I struggle with as far as just secularism or secularist Israel in general goes. How it is that it could call itself a Jewish state yet be secularist at the same time. It just seems, a bit counterintuitive to me to some extent. I don't quite understand, other than Judaism isn't necessarily a religion, and it's an ethnic, it's an ethnicity, and so that part of it, I think that's what's used to justify it being a secularist state yet Jewish at the same time. And there's really just a lot there, to unpack.
I know we've just scratched the surface.
Yes, indeed, and I know you're pressed for time this evening. One of the other topics we have yet to discuss is the pertaining to the anti-BDS legislation and the anti-free speech legislation regarding BDS, which would basically make it would basically criminalize any talk about BDS in what is it, something like 25 states. And I see that as a major problem, regarding constitutional rights in this country and the constitutional right to free speech.
I should add, it's not just legislation. There have also been executive orders. Here in Maryland, Governor Hogan issued an executive order that anyone who wants to do business with the state has to sign a statement saying that they will not participate in the BDS.
Oh, wow. So that makes it even more complicated and makes it even more anti-free market in a profound way. and that would do a lot to drown out the voices of anyone who has grievances about these companies and their policies. And that to me seems rather counterintuitive, as far as, possibly countering extremism, for example, and also, as far as democracy in Israel goes.
Well, that's true, but remember, they don't have a First Amendment like we do.
And I'm admittedly naive regarding Israel's constitution and Israel's free speech, any laws on free speech in Israel, but I do believe very, very sincerely that people should be able to discuss this issue freely, here and in Israel and anywhere, without it being labeled anti-Semitic, because I'm very much aware as to how that limiting free speech could potentially lead to more extremism, and I believe people should be able to discuss this issue, who are on different sides, and how to reach agreements on moving forward, and how to address grievances of Palestinians. And I do think it's very silly that people are just automatically shut down from having any discussion about this, and automatically labeled as being anti-Semitic or hateful towards Jews.
Well, I alluded to this earlier. I didn't get a chance to give it the emphasis it really deserves. But the fact is that one of the things that annoys me is the presentation of the Israeli-Palestinian dispute as a religious dispute. It is not a religious dispute. It is a land dispute which has been given the color of religion. The fact is that the original Zionists were people who were atheists or agnostics. They were not particularly religious Jews. And it's not just the Orthodox Jews, by the way, who have who criticize Zionism. One of the best early books on this question was What Price Israel by a man named Ralford Lilienthal. Lilienthal was a religious Jew, not an extremist by any means, but one who got smeared and even got death threats because he dared to question Israel.
Oh, well, I'm not familiar with that author, but I will definitely look up information about him. And I am well aware that does happen with Jewish people who criticize Israel and criticize Israel's foreign policy. And I do believe that again, it's a huge mistake to disregard the First Amendment, and our First Amendment rights in this country in the name of shutting down any talk about BDS. And we should be able to have discussion about this openly and discuss grievances for people, any people who have grievances. And as far as free market principles go as well, I think it's completely counterproductive to shut down free speech about this topic. But I do realize we're running out. We're running out of time, and so it would probably be a good idea to close this out. I'd love to have you back on in the future, though. Soon, if possible.
I'd be glad to do that.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'd also be interested in possibly discussing some other topics with you. I know you've studied physics, and and I'd be very interested in discussing your ideas about how physics kind of provides evidence for God, and I know that's a very big topic of discussion right there. But with that, are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Uh, um, Let me just make a personal statement about how I once was attacked to show. I had given a speech at the University of Pennsylvania to at the invitation of a student group, and during the speech, or at the end of the speech, I was challenged by a member of the audience uh, for my support of the two-state solution. And he said, was I saying that Israel had a right to exist? Student, obviously a critic of, a severe critic of Israel, and one who denied Israel's rights to exist. And I said to him, I am not claiming that Israel has a moral or a legal right to exist. All I'm saying is that people want peace on both sides, and that we have to acknowledge that the Jews of Europe did suffer horribly uh, in Europe, and especially in World War II. There was a Holocaust, and that they were looking for refuge, and that some of them are now here in Palestine, and that as an act of charity, uh, a two-state solution would be a way of accommodating the situation. Um, and that therefore, out of a desire for peace, a pragmatic desire for peace, Palestinians should accept the two-state solution. The school newspaper the next day had an article about my speech, and although the article was actually quite accurate presentation of my speech, the headline was, Speaker Denies Israel's Rights to Exist. and and it was picked up by one of the anti-Muslim websites, and you know, and I but I was gratified that the students wrote to the paper who had been at the lecture, and they said this headline was really misleading, and described what I had actually said. But the question, that it brings up is why? Why would a newspaper headline writer, and why would a troll website, try to misrepresent what someone was saying in that way?
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely a topic worthy of discussion. Uh, that could even make for a good episode all by itself. And I really do hope that these anti-free speech laws are rejected as far as these anti-BDS laws go in this country. But it has been great having you on tonight, though. And I really do appreciate your time. It's been a very interesting discussion with you, and we'll have you on again soon.